So welcome everybody to the second Curiosity of the year. So I'm really excited in terms of the speakers that are here today. But I think the topic that we're presenting in terms of our debate, or that we really want to ignite debate in, is something a little bit more close to our hearts at the moment. And I just want to be clear that what we're trying to discuss here today is more concept around what's happening in higher education. But I did want to contextualize it for you quite specifically and quite personally for us at the Da Vinci Institute. So I'm sure you're aware that there's been a lot of student unrest at the moment within South Africa in general, across the country. And it's been something that has triggered quite a lot of widespread debate around what should we be doing as higher education institutions, things like inclusivity. What does that mean? How do we go about it, etc. The events leading up to this obviously have been the student unrest, and very tragically, the man who lost his life as the innocent bystander, who was Mtokozizi Edwin Ntumba, was a Da Vinci graduate who we graduated at the end of last year. And he really was an incredible Da Vincian in every single way. And ironically, and rather sadly ironically, his topic and what he actually looked at was specifically in his own field, where he said that how the burning of tires and how all these issues in terms of student experiences, in terms of experiences, actually disrupt service delivery, because that was in his area. He worked for the municipality. So in terms of his death, we don't want to focus on his death. We don't want to focus on all of those aspects, but we do want to ask ourselves the question, what should we be doing as a higher education institution to have inclusivity? What should we be doing in the higher education sector that these type of things don't happen? Because, in his memory, we always want to live the tenets of what he stood for, which was things like remarkability, sustainable societies, changing our country, etc. So I'd like the debate today to focus around what is it that we can do, should do, mustn't do, etc., not about the student rights themselves. Anyone is free to comment. Prof. Klop, I don't know if you want to add anything. I'd really appreciate you guys can just unmute your mics and talk. If it gets too disruptive, then we'll just go to hands. But I would really like to sort of have an idea around it, because I think as citizens, we all have some kind of a responsibility to actually be part of this debate, and not only because we have lost someone very close to us, and we are in contact with his wife, and they're well aware that we are very much, pro making his memory something positive into the future.
No, thank you, Dr. Kunen. My view is, and just to add to that, I think it's important that we really integrate this matter and ask ourselves what's really important, as you flagged out, and how do we need to think and how do we argue around that? What are the important points to take forward, to nurture, and to actually ensure that we have impact in future, making life better for all of us, living the dream. So I think, and I've got some ideas I will add in, but that's, I think, where we should be arguing from, and, love to hear what the other colleagues are saying and want to share with us.
Hi, Marlo. It's Shirley Lloyd.
Hi, Dr. Lloyd.
I really believe that out of the tragedy and out of the current situation, we have to relook and rethink the funding of education and training, and that includes private as well, public and private, higher education. I believe that if you look differently across all the funding sources, all the pots of money, we look differently at the way teaching and learning must happen. We look differently at how we slowly make sure that the constitution of this country becomes a reality, which says free basic education for all, as well as making higher education more and more accessible. And it doesn't cut out private higher ed either. And I believe we have to have a totally new and different conversation. It doesn't help having almost putting a little stitch in here and a plaster on there. There's a lot of money out there. If you take it that the skills levy per year brings in many, many billions. And if you take it that in the SETAs themselves, there's a lot of money. If you take bursary funds, foundations, etc. And if we had to look at all of that, Surely we could come up with a totally different way of making sure that every child has free schooling, and at least every single person who wants free education for a first post-school qualification should get it for free. So I think it's a brand new and different conversation. Thank you.
And Dr. Lloyd, do you think that around the free education for the first, degree or diploma or first qualification should have specific requirements attached to it, like, for example, the current entrance requirements, or should it have, pass-based requirements to ensure that that would, sort of leverage what is needed from the student?
I think a different narrative has to happen there as well. We have to very decisively talk about what sort of work people want to do and where is the best place to study to get the type of knowledge, skills, competence, etc. Currently, everybody wants to go to university. And we forget that there are TVET colleges, there's community colleges, there are other institutional types where you can go and study to be what you want to be without necessarily going to university. And I think that's hugely important. Changing the narrative, having a look at what do you want to be, what are the skills needed, where are these offered, and also looking differently at how we learn. We will work and learn, and maybe looking differently at how the NQF construct or the qualifications are constructed. So yes, it's really like out there, some of the things I'm saying, but I'm not the only one saying them. There are people starting to say we have to rethink and look differently, and certainly make sure that everybody has a chance to learn something somewhere that is a skill and knowledge that will help them get into the form of work that they'd like to do.
Thanks, Dr. Lloyd. And I think, it's quite a critical point you make in terms of also ensuring that what students are studying gets them jobs and work. And I know you're a big advocate in terms of micro learning and those type of areas. And I really do believe that something that my own personal feeling is that the betterment of people doesn't have to happen only through formal qualifications. I don't think we've leveraged enough around things like the concept of micro learning environments and trying to sort of get badging along the way, that people are able to work and gain skill within a space. We put a lot of pressure on full qualifications, and perhaps that's something else that people could consider in the space.
I fully agree with what Shirley has just mentioned now. But I think as we debate this, we've got to look at the issue not just from one perspective, and that is just the funding. It is an important resource for education, but I think we must look at the education system as a whole, because the way I see it in South Africa, our education system has failed us. The current education system is not doing what is required in a disruptive environment. It's not really doing, as it says, what the Constitution provides for. And I think we can get into that debate, I think, the sooner the better. Thank you.
Thanks. If I may add my 2 cents, and coming from someone that's been about 7 to 8 years now since I left varsity, I think, as most of you mentioned, the narrative definitely has to change. And it's more than just, who's paying for fees or free education. I think the whole education system has to also change in the sense, because from my experience, and this is purely from my experience as well, I think a lot of younger students that go on to varsity, we also end up chasing, prestigious varsity status or names. And as Shirley mentioned, when in actual fact, you could go to, you could get those skills or that knowledge from a less, reputable, not really, I would say less reputable, but a less highly statusable varsity at, reduced cost and so forth. And I think also second, leading up to that, what I've also learned is that what they don't teach enough within the schooling system, and also again, from my experience within the varsity system, is that we also kind of get used to the narrative as a student of like, I'm just studying to get this mark so I can pass and go to the next level, and not more from the perspective of like, okay, what I'm learning now, how do I apply it practically? because I've seen that in practice, and also within my field specifically, that a lot of clients that study the same, degree and qualifications as I have, they struggle with applying that practically. And I think leading up to also the fee discussion, probably the big debate that's usually happening, and especially from like private institutions, their concern is like, oh, but how do we control and make sure that the students who apply for our funding will work hard and earn their way, and we're not just giving funds away. I think it also has to come more effort from their side, which I think would have made a difference if, it was implemented back when I was in varsity, is that if they introduce also mentoring, and even some of the employees, send them over to the varsity and give the students an insight of like, you start in charge of accounting. This is the type of work you're going to do, the type of opportunities you're going to get access to, so that students then get firsthand experience of, okay, this is actually what I'm going to be doing if I study this course after leaving varsity. And that way, I think from a company or the private institution's point of view, they then also have a hand in investing in the students that they are providing funding for. Not to mention the fact that from a tax point of view, a lot of those private institutions, they can actually write a lot of those contributions off, including their time, as a tax deduction. In other words, they can reduce their company taxes every year. So they do get a benefit out of it, aside from corporate social responsibility as well.
We've got 2 online comments that came through before, and the one was from Basani, and it's the comment that for me, online learning should be improving reach and bring more people into the system. How can we ensure that everyone has access to the internet, or ensuring that students access study material? I think this is really a critical point that you've made here, because I do think that accessibility to material, free material that's available online, and the ability to engage, but that important question of how do we reach from a technological perspective? So I think that's definitely something to continue the debate with. And then Dr. Segamoni's added that whilst the resources such as the funding is imperative to continue the study, there are those that have the qualification and have the finances, but actually cannot get into university. And I think this is a major, major issue and a major point in terms of the lack of, facilities at times there are. But I think, Dr. Lloyd, you've reminded us about other possibilities out there. And Dr. Lloyd, your comment on online and digital learning designed and delivered in a creative way should be cost effective and efficient, because it enables a different approach, and certainly goes back. You can read the comments there on the side. I think your point there, Dr. Lloyd, is well taken to the point above. But the big issue, again, is putting, which you've said and everyone has said, the smart devices in the hands of students, cheaper data packages, and ensure no students left behind. And at Da Vinci, we've actually seen that on one of our programs, which is similarly aligned. It's a funded program for students that come from trying circumstances. The first group, we didn't have laptops immediately. We've provided every single student with a device. We have seen the shift in that space. Dr. Deploy Saliers is online. She can comment. So yes, Dr. Lloyd, I think, as well as Basani, I think very valid points made in terms of that. And definitely, Dr. Segamoni, your point around universities. Do we need more universities in this country? How can we ensure that we saw the disruption? Dr. Lloyd, you spoke about schools and free schools. I mean, there were thousands of learners who at the beginning of this year did not have places in grade 1, grade 6, etc. So definitely, is there a capacity issue, something to discuss?
Thank you, Dr. Kunen. And I think the points being made there on the comments, because I want to flag and the thing about access and accessibility. But I think that being said, the question is, how do we affect that? Because at the end, we must also argue differently around this, because traditionally we take it from a pedagogical perspective. And like Russell pointed out, people are working, and I would love to believe that more and more people will start to work and study part-time even after school. So they will learn differently, and hence our safety nets need to look and to cater for that in a different way. And by doing that, and think about how can we open access and also make it more accessible for people. And then not just technology, it's also from a pedagogy, andragogy, even heterogogy perspective, the way we create knowledge and we transfer knowledge, and the case studies we use. So I think we must open up the system. So having more players will definitely make a difference. My concern is, if I look at the more universities, if they just come in and they do the same thing, I think that's where the problem is. That we must really challenge the learning and the delivery model and say, let's be more eloquent in doing this. Let's be more succinct and focused, because that's the only way that we will really start making a difference. And we almost want to say, let's forget what we've done in the past. Let's bring up a new, totally freed up system that's will allow us to move much, much faster. And I think that's a few pointers from my side.
My point is that the Center for Enterprise Development and Enterprise says that the best education that a young person can have is to get their first job. And the idea of having some form of work experience is really an excellent education. And I think, therefore, what we must do is facilitate part-time learning. And Vinci has a very good, most of our students are in fact part-timers, that they currently are working and also studying at the same time. And this has the advantage that they can use their knowledge soon after it's been acquired. They can use it. And a point which I've made before is that knowledge is like any other, knowledge is different to other forms of capital or other forms of asset. Most assets, if you use them, they depreciate. Knowledge is the reverse. The more you use knowledge, the greater it appreciates. And so a model which is based on part-time learning, I think, is an excellent one. And Vinci has a significant advantage in that area, in that the bulk of our students are, in fact, part-timers.
Thanks, Brian. And I see Dr. Good also made a comment in there about adult learners and students over 35, reskilling, recareering, etc. Reagan?
I just wanted to agree, and connect sort of with something that Heather had said, and that Prof. Singh had mentioned. So it's our secondary schooling that's failing our students, but I think it's broader than that. And I think the problem is, if we just look at focusing on tertiary education, we're missing a big problem, and we're missing the source of the problem, which is, our primary school education is completely, failing us. And so many children are being pushed through the system and they can't read. So if you're trying to sort out something on one end, but we're missing the foundation, secondary schooling, and even before that, primary school education, I think it's like putting a Band-Aid on and trying to solve something, but we're not going to the root cause. I think we actually need to look bigger and broader and go back to where this is all starting.
I appreciate that, and I definitely think the basics in schooling, and this is a debate perhaps we can bring up again and discuss at another point, another juncture. This was just sort of a teaser and a taste to start. So, Regan, thank you for that. I think it's critical to focus on that as well. And for everyone's comments, you can see people's comments in the comments bar as well. And I think very important, Dr. Mutambara has put there that a need to integrate affordable structures as far as internet connectivity is concerned. And this is a critical driver. And I think we've seen over and over that South Africa really is a data-heavy country in terms of cost and accessibility in terms of that. So thank you very much for engaging in the debate. It is now time for the formal part, or formal and informal, if I can say. The first speaker up is our student speaker. And I always have a chuckle when I say a student speaker at Vinci, because a student speaker at Vinci definitely is not a student in the traditional sense of the word. So we definitely live, as Brian pointed out, the concept of our students having wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience, wealth of everything. And that is why I think their voices come across so loud and proud, and they offer such depth. So Marie Moody is one of our doctoral candidates. She has over 20 years expertise in marketing and product development. As I said, definitely not a typical student. Her topic that she's looking at for her doctoral studies is the relationship between ethical leadership and strategic business imperatives, a pragmatic inquiry approach. And she's here to enlighten us on her journey. I just want to remind you, before I introduce her fully, our students come here when they're at the stage where they've just kind of finished their proposal. They're grappling with some of their stuff around their literature, or they're at a literature review stage. So they really do appreciate your comments and feedback, because it can actually shift and change their study. And I think for somebody like Marie, with her depth and experience, she's passionate about productivity through effective management, but her wealth of experience sits as well in major work that she's done in terms of strategy. She's very involved in the application of strategy, business improvement techniques, and all of these to increase things like sales, improve customer relations, stakeholder relations. So very much focused around the management of innovation and people, that is very much critical to the TIPS framework. So without further ado, I introduce to you our guest speaker this evening. So I will call you our guest speaker, our guest student speaker, Marie Moody. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Marlo. That was very kind of you to give me such a grand introduction. I don't think I'm all of that. But anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for this platform. To fellow academia, good afternoon. I'm going to give you some background to my study. As Dr. Marlo introduced my topic, I've actually chosen to this topic because the background to what informed my study comes from the issues that have arisen with SOEs, okay, state-owned entities. We find them being financed with public funds, and yet we find them so ineffective. And the key issue with this, or concern for me with this, is you using revenues and taxpayers' money that should be going into the development of the country. And these state-owned entities have been designed in such a way that they are given a mandate and almost an exclusive right in certain parts of the economy. And if you look at the mandate from a parliamentary perspective and a business perspective of these entities or organizations, they have been set up to stimulate the economy, to encourage growth, to encourage foreign investment. However, year on year, we're actually seeing poorer and poorer performance. And if you look at the structures that are put in place, for example, I'm going to speak to, because mine is the relationship between ethical leadership and strategic business imperatives. And the reason I've selected that is because of my nature of the business that I'm in. And I'm also involved in setting up certain structures and putting principles in place, as well as processes. That concerned me a lot. When I listened to the news, I used a reference point of the Nugent Commission of Inquiry, their report. And then I've looked at what do we speak to this? What can I say? The King 4 report. If I look at the Companies Act, if I look at our Constitution, all these management or policies that are put in place to ensure that a business or an entity is properly governed, run, are in place. However, we see billions of rands being spent and there's no accountability. And we see this corruption that's so pervasive and inappropriate expenditure, and nobody's held accountable for it. So that is why I've actually elected to go into this area of research. And one of the key things that informed my study, one of the key things that I've done with the study is not only look at those key imperatives. I've gone a step further, because one of the requirements as a PhD student, you're supposed to contribute to the body of knowledge. So I've taken a part of the Constitution, I've included the Constitution on what the responsibility is, because if I take the Nugent report and I look at what was reported in the Nugent report, and that was actioned by the president, and it was feedback given to the president, then there's recommendations that go into this report, and there's so much legitimate evidence that would require or enable the leadership of this country to take action, whatever that action may be, and that is not happening. And when I go to the other structures that are in place, I looked at the public protector from a constitutional perspective. What are their responsibilities? And I've tabled this in my research. I've also gone on to state how all these different aspects of leadership, how best can I say this so that it makes sense? How all these aspects in terms of the policies, regulation, the people, and how a business is supposed to operate with the political aspect, because our business environment in South Africa, let us not try and step aside from that. It's highly politicized. And if we're only going to leave this for people to report in books that they write or things that happen in terms of how they reported in the news, and an inquiry that doesn't lead to any accountability, how then do we start as a country or as institutions of learning, take that part of that responsibility, look for possible gaps in how they're conducting business, and make propositions on how to change this, because it affects not only the growth of a country, it affects the future functioning of this country. We may sit down and sit back and be silent about everything and say, okay, if I keep quiet, it all goes under the radar. Maybe somebody else will take a responsibility for that. Or maybe somebody else will stick their next. And I feel from an educational perspective, it is everybody who is studying and in the education sector who can make a difference. It's your and my responsibility to go out there and look for resolutions and put the relevant people and leaders under pressure and say, this is what we're proposing. So that's what I've done. I've looked at that and I've proposed a model. And I've named this model because you need to put something together that's going to contribute to the body of knowledge. And I've taken my name, Marie, whatever you wish to say, as the acronym, okay, for the study, for the model that I've created, speaking to strategy and ethical leadership. And I've created an ecosystem, and this ecosystem speaks to the outer sphere of the model, speaks to management. What is management all about? What are their responsibilities? The key concepts and constructs that I speak to are management, leadership, their actions, their roles and responsibility. And I speak to, the M is speaking to management, A speaking to accountability in their roles and responsibilities. Okay, the R is your roles and responsibilities. Then I speak to the letter I, and I is the imperatives that are essential for the functioning of an entity. And then the final one, the E, is the enterprise environment, whether it be in an SOE, so that this could actually be replicated, even if it were outside an SOE. And that would actually form the whole model. However, I have broken it up into an ecosystem. And this business ecosystem speaks to ethical leadership, people, business imperatives, which lead to outcomes. And all these form part of the ecosystem. And when I speak to, for example, I'll speak first to the ethical part of it. I speak to how corporate governance and leadership and how the structure of entities are, and the legislation, regulation, what sort of frameworks one can propose or create, and policies and procedures. Then I speak about the people part. What is management's responsibility? How to lead, your leadership style, the importance of communication and management of conflict. And this is not only people conflict, this is conflict outside of just the work, okay? It's conflict with the organizational strategy, the planning that has been put into place and what needs to be executed. And also leaders' culture, their behavior, how do they lead? What sort of models do they display? What are the ideals that we should actually have? And how is it possible to execute these? And I've referenced the works of other researchers to support each of these constructs or concepts that I'm driving. Then I speak to the business imperatives, and key to them, especially with the change, especially with the challenges we experiencing now and change with the way business environments work. I've spoken to strategy, innovation, and technology. And then I've spoken to how to manage that in terms of performance and the financial aspect of it. And the possible risk when you talk about strategy and managing risk, yet you also driving your bottom line. And what outcomes one can possibly have. Your quality of your outcomes, and whether there's order or disorder and responses to both the internal and the external environments because of the environment that SOEs have to work in. I don't know if there's anything else perhaps, or somebody would like to.
Sorry, Marie, that's very interesting what you've mentioned, so I'm trying to ask myself, how would you practically implement this? So if you can maybe just quickly share with us your methodology that you envisage that you will utilize to accomplish and address this objective of yours.
So Maury, I've listened to you covering the different areas that of your model that you've proposed. And you've rightly pointed out that you also consider the financial implications. I'm hoping you can just elaborate a little bit, especially whether you have taken into account that when it comes to finances and making a pivot in terms of a disruptive environment, that all businesses intending to make a pivot towards innovation have to make an investment, and what that investment would be. Because if you speak to strategy, it would be at a high level, but the application requires an investment. So I want you to just focus on that investment that any enterprise would have to make in order to make a pivot. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Paul and Prof. HB. I'm going to start with the financial aspect. The financial aspect, I've actually spoken to part of the financial aspect in terms of how do you plan on executing and having a business plan to support the business strategy. And also, we might just talk about finances. You can invest, and this is where the problem, is where the part of the problem begins, is with SOEs, we focus on the finances, okay? And everybody's driving the report. They have the auditor general to evaluate their performance. Feedback is given, but nothing happens in terms of their finances. Is it really a financial issue? Because they get bailout after bailout, okay? So I have gone and I've looked at perhaps, do they have the necessary skills? Are they looking at that? Are they monitoring performance? How do they monitor performance? because we can do all of that and say, yes, it requires finance, and that's what they are getting, but there's no output. And the output that we see is only to a select few. We see the degradation of the infrastructure of the country, okay? And there is no body being held accountable, even after all that financial aspect. I hope that actually, does that address?
Yeah, no, thank you, Marie. I think that helps a lot.
Prof, you also asked about the methodology that I'm actually at this stage where I'm applying for ethical clearance. The methodology I've selected to use is actually a qualitative, a mixed method, qualitative, quantitative method, and I want a qualitative sequential research. And the reason I've elected or opted for this research is because I am doing an inquiry into what are the possible problems. And if I have qualitative and focus group discussions, what arises out of there, then I can then put into questionnaires and send that out and ask for ratings on the respective or the key findings that come out of the qualitative research. And then I'll triangulate the data to confirm or dispute what these findings are in order to inform the outcome or results of research.
Thank you, Marie.
Thank you, Prof. Klopper. I have 3 comments, if I may, or just possibly that Marie or Maury could have a think about this. Maury said that there is no accountability. Maybe she could look at it possibly in another way. I'd like to propose that there are, in fact, significant and very good pieces of legislation, policies, etc., which require extreme accountability and responsibility. But these are dishonored, and they are dishonored through role modeling, that the rule of law has gone out of the window, political will. We are still caught up a lot, and maybe rightly so, that we have to move away from it at some stage. But there is still a lot of emotion based on our past history. And so the political will to deal decisively with certain issues is not there. So there is really fear and favor. I'd also like to say that there's corruption. We all know that. And the view about corruption and the ability to take action. So yes, there are, I believe, significant mechanisms in place for accountability. We just have to look at the portfolio committees, our courts, our justice system, and yet people choose to treat them with dishonor or disregard, etc. The second thing maybe I'd like to pick up is the issue, the focus on the finances. And yes, I'd like to suggest again, maybe Maury can have a look at this, and when she talks to people, to actually ask the presidency, the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation about this, because whilst SOEs, etc., fall under the Public Finance Management Act, with a focus on finances, there's the other crucial element of the annual performance plans, medium-term strategic frameworks, where there are targets set, where there are goals, business plans, etc. And I would like to suggest, and maybe Maury could look at that the reason we are still seeing all the issues she raises correctly is because the skill of evaluation isn't sufficiently linked to monitoring. And very interestingly, if you look at the scarce skills list that the Minister of Home Affairs has, you look at the list under the education section, and it says there's a huge scarcity in terms of people who can actually monitor and evaluate. So I think it's that SOEs, government, departments, people out there, they know how to monitor, but they don't know how to evaluate the efficacy of the things. And then the third comment, and maybe Maury can look at this with her supervisors. It's an incredible study, I believe, but it's very complex and layered. So having a look at how you're going to put it all together, that it reads well, that there is a simplicity, not meaning simplistic, but yet still retaining its complexity and layeredness. So I hope those three comments are useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lloyd. I found them useful. I think Marie will agree. Heather, maybe a last remark from your side?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Marie, I've enjoyed your presentation tonight, and thank you. I think you touching on some issues that are close to a lot of people and affect a great many of us. But I'm curious as to why you're focusing on the monitoring and evaluation and the external structure and the implementation, where we know that democracies are more successful when there's an active citizenship participation. And isn't one of the challenges engaging, equipping, and educating our people on how to productively and effectively engage with elected officials, with legislation, with commentary on legislation? I'm thinking, for example, of the Dear South Africa project. And I think perhaps we're seeing so many protests and demonstrations, it's because people think that that's what gets heard and that's the only response. And to solve both things, how do we equip and challenge South Africans of all walks of life and enable them to engage with government that meets their needs and that is aligned to their community aspects? Is that not part of the solution as well?
Thank you very much. I have taken note of your comments, and every one of them is absolutely important. I think I have touched it on some of it, most of it, to a large extent. And I've tried my best to pull it, Dr. Lloyd, I've tried to pull my study together as neatly as possible and logically so that it's also interesting. However, I haven't really touched much on what Dr. Heather has proposed, people engagement and how they can address those issues. And that is a huge gap. Okay, I appreciate, I'm going to that and see how best I could actually include that as well in my study. So I hope I do make sense of what I'm doing, and it does contribute to the body of knowledge, and it is significant because I just don't want to be saying what everybody else is saying. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Maury, and to everyone that's commented. And please also have a look, Maury, in the comments. Dr. Sigamoni has put a comment and Dr. Lloyd has put another comment. So please just have a look in the comment box as well. And thank you for joining us and your participation. I know it is quite a daunting process.